Thank you. Good afternoon. I am delighted to chair the panel on payments today, and I'm joined by two of Shieldpay's fantastic partners. Polly, can you give a quick intro, please?
Yeah, sure. My name's Polly Blenkin. I'm a partner at Milberg, London. So we're a claimant litigation boutique specialising in group actions. The majority of my time is spent doing the opt-in GLOs, so don't ask me anything about opt-out. And we also have a competition litigation department headed up by Natasha over there. And we do bits and pieces of unitary actions as well from our old ComLit days.
Brilliant, thank you. And Clinton?
Hi, I'm Clinton Smith. I'm the CIO of Case Pilots. At Case Pilots, I suppose in terms of giving us a label, we'd be a claims administrator, but we seek to work with law firms throughout the lifespan of their cases. I think one of the terms everyone likes to use is from cradle to grave, but I prefer from conception to completion, primarily because by the time it's born, you know, there's already that sort of nature-nurture. Certain things are already set in place that I think if we have an earlier dialogue, we can help make sure that case comes out and starts running in the right way. So I'm here to help discuss the wonderful area of payments. And
thank you. And I'm Claire van der Zant. I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships at Shieldpay. Shieldpay facilitates high-value transactions for the payments that matter the most. We're not about your ordinary, everyday payments, but more the once-in-a-lifetime, must-not-fail transactions, buying a house, selling a business, or indeed getting damages into the hands of claimants in the delivery of justice, which is what we're talking about today. Chris has sort of teed me up nicely, so I'll give you a drink later. Thanks, Chris. But we are talking about more of the very practical end of litigation, but it's the bit to me that feels like the most exciting part because it's the culmination of all the work that you do in getting justice into the hands of people who really need it the most. As Polly said, you know, we're going to talk largely about the GLO space because that's very much where in the UK our experience has been today. I know we get very caught in the vernacular of how we're going to get things through the CAT and moving class actions forward. But actually there's a huge amount of experience that we have already today in delivering hugely significant settlements and payments for the GLO work across data breach, across emissions. We'll talk about some of those today, I'm sure. But getting payments into the hands of the claimants is you know, the end result of all the work that you're doing. What we wanted to come and perhaps debunk a little in terms of the myths of, but the payment's the easy part, right? It can be, but it definitely requires us to quote Steve, collaborate early, collaborate often, and that's what we're going to just have a conversation about today. And please do fire any questions over at us. I think because we haven't done lots of payments in the UK, I'm hoping there are some good questions coming. So let's start with when, and when do you start talking about and engaging with partners when you're looking to do a payment? So Clinton, in your experience, at what point do you need to start thinking about the administration and the payments of a case to deliver the best outcomes?
I think I'm going to concentrate mainly on the opt-out because I've got Polly here who's going to just totally rule on the opt-in. So on the opt-out, the whole process, as you know, starts with the notice and administration plan. And at that stage, one of the things we have to do is help identify the class, help define the class, and in that definition, part of that definition is really how we are going to pay that class when the end hopefully comes. I think a payment provider has a lot of information about the payments that certain demographics will be acceptable to. And that's why we work with people like Shieldpay, we work with people like Bottom Line and other providers who also, you know, work in different ways to make sure that they are paying their cohort of individuals the right sums at the right time. So for that notice and administration plan, I think it's very important that we have that early discussion with the payment providers, payment specialists, because they are specialists. They know what works with different groups of people, and therefore they should be involved in that conversation as early as possible. Part of the notice administration plan is a budget, so we have to have numbers. And I must say, I do, it does, my heart goes out to you guys when we're on the phone with you saying, okay, we've got, 5 million people to pay. We'll be paying them at maybe, 20, 30 pounds. When? Oh, about 5 years' time, and you have to give us a number of what that's going to look like, what that's going to cost. But it's the nature of it, and I think it's very important that we don't just pull numbers out of the sky. We sort of go to you guys who know what it looks like and make sure that we're getting right numbers to put in that notice and administration plan.
Yeah, thank you. And absolutely, that kind of early understanding of what the case requires in order to get payments delivered, but also things change, things evolve, as we've heard today, and that's just something that we have to keep abreast of, because it does fundamentally change the how at the end. Polly, you've delivered some sizable settlements this year. What did you learn through that process? And second question, is there anything you'd do differently next time?
Yeah, I think just echoing what Steve said in the previous panel about thinking about distribution at the settlement table while you're negotiating the agreement. Somebody in that room needs to understand how you're practically going to pay your clients. And also it's really important from negotiating your costs as well. So that's something that you can recover from the defendants. So you need to be going to the settlement table, or if you're going to trial and you're waiting for a judgment, you need to understand what your hard costs are going to be and what the time that your fee earners are going to be spending on paying clients. And you need to go into the negotiation understanding what those numbers are, coming up with credible narrative for it, and trying to anticipate how much it's all going to cost, because you might settle it 1 year and still might be doing distribution 2 years later. So that's a really difficult exercise. And I think particularly in the GLO kind of context, this is where the client steering committee can really kind of come alive. Some practitioners might know that the way usually the client instruction piece is structured is that the client care documentation will appoint a small number of individuals that will instruct the lawyers on behalf of the tens of thousands of people in the group. And that's how the solicitors get their instructions, comply with all their regulatory duties and obligations, etc. And certainly in Milberg's experience, we've had some great relationships with the committee, and it's really important that once you think that payment distribution is on the horizon, that you are educating them on that process and getting feedback, because they'll understand better than anybody what the messaging needs to look like, and how to deliver the best system for all those people. And so our approach is to have calls and take them along the journey with us, so that when it actually comes time to roll out the payment process to everybody else, you have a good understanding of what that needs to look like. And then in terms of anything I'd do differently, a couple of points come to mind. I didn't realize how many people would want to be paid by check. Yeah, definitely underestimated that. There are still a lot of people that do. And that causes, that's very labor intensive, it knocks them out of the digital payment process, which you guys do so well, and additional cost, manual processes, and I suppose risk as well comes with that whole work stream. So that's something that we're now kind of on notice around, and we'll do much better next time. And it's also that, that comes back to the point of which a couple of panels have talked about, who we're representing and the individuals on the other side of these cases, what they need, understanding, the demography in your group. Do you have older clients? They're probably less likely to do online banking, probably more likely to want checks. Or do you have, are they a vulnerable group of clients? Again, there might be things around that which will inform how you can do your payments. And then the other thing is data cleansing. I think just being a lot more proactive. So obviously when a client's onboarded in a GLO case, there's a lot of data which is gathered from the client themselves, from public databases, etc. And you'll obviously learn things about your clients and the particular data points that are relevant for the case. But because these cases go on so long, it's really important to keep that up to date. So I'll touch on it a little bit later, but I think data cleansing, making sure you've got the most accurate data about your clients is really important, and it's something that only really comes to the forefront once you need to make a payment. You kind of assume that you've got everything because you've onboarded them in a compliant way and fully, and you've won the case. But actually, you do need to kind of actively manage that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Can I
go
add to that? Because obviously, in the opt-in scenario, you've got that long timeline where you're collecting data, you're storing data, and you have to maintain it over that period. Obviously, in opt-out, you may have a few registrations of interest, and there's that whole debate, or should you get loads now? If I get loads too early, the court then says, well, why can't this just be an opt-in? Yeah. So more often or not, we try to solve, we have this scenario where everything happens in a very short span of time near the end, just before distribution and payment. And then we have the challenge of getting that verification, getting that evaluation, and getting that payment out in very short shift. So the data is still an issue, but we haven't got the leisure of being able to go over it and make sure it's super tidy. We have to do it sharp and quick. And again, technology plays a massive part in that.
Yeah.
Don't spoil the next question. That's where I'm coming to next. But just to pick up on a couple of those bits that does lead me into the next one is that collaboration piece, which is how are you going to communicate to claimants about receiving that money? And actually there's a huge piece that we need to do together in collaboration on brand building. You know, they have to be really confident about the fact that they're going to receive some funds, and it's not a scam. You know, that is something that we all do have to lean into and be cognizant of when we're getting to the point of paying damages. Is we've got a very skeptical market. I can talk in the UK, I would imagine it's similar in Europe, when it comes to receiving payments, and we've educated people to be very wary of that. But that's then something that we have to zoom into when it comes to the point of time where we're trying to take people through a payments journey, where we're trying to collect information to verify them, where we're trying to, you know, get them the money that actually this is safe. You know, there are better ways than checks. I know you worked very hard to try and get everybody through a digital journey, but sometimes it just wasn't possible. So one of the most important things that we do need to get right is communication, which is very much the theme carried on from the settlements panel. But that communication piece then does flow in to all of the work that we do in payments. So Clinton, as the role of the administrator, you play a neutral role between all of the parties, of a case defendant, law firm, courts, payments partners. What does good look like in terms of communication?
Yeah, just on this point of neutral, yeah, we may be neutral in terms of, you know, the law firm, the defendants, the courts, but our role, as was mentioned earlier, is to make sure the claimants are getting their due. So, you know, that's where our allegiance lie. And whether it's a court decision led by a case going before the CAT or whatever, and the defendants losing, or whether it's a defendant-led process where they've decided to fess up and say, I want to settle this in some way, our role is obviously making sure that the claimants get what they're due. In terms of the communication that you're referring to, let's look at just the part between the law firm, the defendant, the courts, and any other interested party or interested institution in that front. I think, you know, the key to it is about the data. You know, a few years back, we played a role in we administrated in a Parker ITR marine host settlement, which was defendant-led. And one of the challenges we have is that every week or every 2 weeks, either the defendant wants to know what's going on, or the law firm wants to know what's going on, or the defendant wants to know what's going on. And all they really cared about was how much money was going out, who was going to, and so forth. So we spent a lot of time managing spreadsheets. Yeah, the bane of my life, a spreadsheet. And a bigger bane of my life is a lawyer with a spreadsheet. But, no offense. When we came to setting up, Kate's pilots in its integrity, the first thing I said, to Claire, who's obviously the CEO, is that we've got to have proper software behind this. We've got to have a piece of software that enables us to enable communication between all parties without us having to have a hand in it. And, the data speaks its own truth. So we make sure that that data is managed in such a way and has an interface that makes sense to the law firm, an interface that makes sense to the defendants if they want to know, the state of the play, if they're interested, post-settlement about what's happening with the funds. And also one that enables the claimants to interact with us. I'm going to leave off the claimant piece once again because I know that's where your strengths lay. But a part of that data management that is enabled through the advancement of technologies and API technology is that we are able to tell in real time what is happening with a payment. Yeah. Due to the API that we've got linked up together, the lawyers say, yep, these ones are good for payment. We pass that information over to you. You do your regulatory checks. You send out the payments. API tells us X, Y, Z have been paid. These ones are waiting payment. These ones, for whatever reason, didn't pass KYC, help reducing fraud and so forth. And that comes straight back into a nice dashboard that enables everyone to know what's going on. And that's communication. It's not the communication maybe of vocalizing things, but it's all about sharing knowledge and making sure everyone's involved in the process.
That transparency piece.
Transparency piece, exactly.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I always think about it, when I'm sure we've all had the experience of sending a big amount of money to somebody, whether it's a deposit for a home or a rental or what have you, and you sort of send it and you think, has it gone? Is it there? Where is it? Has it happened? And that's the bit that we have to do at scale at Shieldpay, is give that transparency of where the transaction is. Thanks for the plug. So, Polly, when it comes to planning and delivering payments to claimants, what does good look like when we consider that communication piece?
Yeah, well, it's something that you need to have a few hats in the room, I think, when you're devising your communication strategy. So it's the fee earner who understands the parameters of the settlement agreement, if there are any sensitivities. It's a lot easier if there's been a judgment, so it's in the public domain, you've got things you can point to. But are there any restrictions in the settlement agreement that you need to be aware of when you're communicating with the cohort at large? Some things will be left to the preserve of the client steering committee, and then more widely you might hold back some information. And then you need, your marketing hat on, who's in the room thinking, the buzzwords, what's going to make sure that this email gets noticed in somebody's junk folder or passes whatever filtering system your clients have got. And then also compliance is a big point as well, making sure that you're satisfying all of your obligations and duties under the SRA rules, and that can be a balancing act as well with the level of detail that you're providing and when you're providing that, whether you're being fulsome at the beginning or whether it's more iterative depending on client engagement and what people want to know. I think I've found that when people are signing up to claims, the things they care about are how long is it going to take, how much am I going to get, what's my personal risk, and how much do you cost? And then on the other end, they want to understand how is my compensation calculated, how did you come up with this number you're now presenting with me, to me, tell me about your fees, what cut have you taken? And then kind of secondary to those two, the other ones will be around the payment process, so that kind of trust factor that we've touched on and Deborah touched on earlier in the panel before us as well. So, people who don't trust the emails coming from Shieldpay or the direct ID process. Those people, some of them like to get paid by check. And also the other issue I see is authority to settle. And that's usually just about reminding people the architecture that you have in a group claim where you have tens of thousands of claimants, and it comes back to that client steering committee point, and you just have to explain to people that, you know, that's what they signed up for. We can't take individual instructions. There's no ability for you to renegotiate the amount of compensation that's been allotted to you. And I think on all of those topics, I think from the very outset, before you've even told your clients that you've settled and they're going to get a payment, you need to have clear, concise messaging on that amongst all of your teams. So the lawyers, compliance, the people who are picking up the phone in your client care teams, and you guys, you know, the payment agent as well, who are getting inbound calls from clients, that everybody understands what the message is. And I guess related to that as well, that there are clear escalation channels for communications. I think for the large part, most people, we've found in our experience, most people are happy with a kind of short and shrift information, and they're just surprised and delighted to get some money, which is brilliant. And then you will always get edge cases where people want more information. If they're, you know, distrusting of the process, they've completely forgotten that they signed up to something 4 years ago. Lots of people do. And you just need to understand where those communication channels need to go and what level of seniority, I suppose, whether you need to get compliance involved. Because if it's things like, you know, confusion around fees, or if, you know, the provision of information, those things can quickly escalate into complaints. And the best way to kind of manage that is by having, you know, clear templates right at the beginning. And you know that you've got an escalation that you can go through, providing more information, more comfort to the client that actually everything's in order.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think that sometimes it can feel a little bit like baton passing, like we've done the litigation piece, great, now it's over to the administration, then hand the baton over and off you go payments, but it's not. We have to work together throughout that whole piece because, like you say, you know, you have to name, in the UK, from the regulatory regime, you have to name who is the payments partner. And then if people aren't getting paid, even though they've been communicated that it's going to be in 7 days, within 24 hours, it's not just the law firm that they'll ring, it's not just the administrator, it's also the payments company. And if you're not collaborating and working out how you're managing that, like you say, in terms of escalation points and the messaging and how you handle customers, claimants, it can get very messy.
Yeah, and it comes back to that trust point as well that we've, I was a little disheartened to hear that the Americans also have trust issues, given they're so, you know, they've been doing it for so much longer, and it's more of a kind of...
oh, you mean in terms of claim cases, not just Americans in general with trust issues?
No, in terms of claimants being sceptical, yeah. I thought that was probably more of an issue that we had to deal with. But I guess that comes back to how you're engaging with your clients throughout. You know, do they hear from you often? Have you said anything about how they're going to be paid when that happy day comes, or is it completely out of the blue? You know, if you don't keep your client cohort updated, and again, I think Steve was talking about, you know, really engaging people in the case, what's happening. You know, litigation is slow, but there's often lots of stuff that you can talk about to make sure people know that, you know, you're working as hard to get it through the courts and drive towards payment as quickly as possible. And you'd hope that all of that helps so that you understand how to communicate with your client cohort. I think one of the difficulties is in GLOs, you know, the heavy activity is around the onboarding. So it's, you know, let's do the AML checks, let's get all your client details. If it's, you know, if it's an emissions claim, let's get your vehicle details, let's get proof of purchase. And you kind of do all of that very early on. And then the other kind of period of intense activity when you're asking your clients to do something is the schedule of information, which I think was mentioned earlier on in the day when you serve your clients the questionnaire and that kind of sits in place of a traditional particulars of claim for a large group of people. Other than that, though, claimants can experience your communications in a passive way. You're not really asking them to do anything. So it's about understanding how you wake them up, and you're like, you actually have to do something to get paid. We need to, you know, we need to make sure you are who you say you are, get your details, and push you through the process.
And I think part of that is the branding. Yeah, you have to make sure from that onboarding all the way through to all those communications, and even on the payment, because when we send our payment emails via you, it's on the same brand, has to be from the same brand, just to keep that trust there, to keep that attention, so the claimants can feel that they're still part of the same process and not some stranger sending them an email saying you've got money, which would be nice.
Absolutely. So as is the case in all industries, technology has a hugely important role to play in accelerating and scaling solutions within litigation. Clinton, you've talked about how challenging your role is because it is such a compacted time. You know, you're doing everything in a short space of time. What's your perspective on how technology can pave a new way forward in litigation payments? I know you've already talked about the transparency piece, but
no, there's lots of ways. I mean, I think really, and I'm going to sort of edge a bit into an opt-in scenario here, but I think really the idea of what has happened technology-wise around payments is not just related to payment technology. Yeah? I mean, when we started off pre-COVID, we talked about automation. It's all about automation. It's all about, you know, making sure that all those repeated processes in a case is done without that manual intervention. And every time we sit in front of a law firm, they'll say, oh, but what about AI? And I'll say to them, well, you've got to feed a machine to, you know, to really benefit from AI. And by gum, over COVID, we have fed the payment machine. We've fed the payment machine, you know, way past, you know, the wafer thin mint, and it's never going to explode. What's happened post-COVID is that we've got a totally different relationship with digital payments. Yeah, whether it be, you know, voucher codes and prepayment cards that, you know, Black Hawk promotes, you know, whether it be open banking, you know, that lots of different companies out there use as well. We've got a totally different relationship with payments. And I must admit, you know, I'm very happy that, you know, pre-COVID, I didn't invest in one of those money clip business. You know, those clips that you used to have at all your £20 and you roll it in and you clip it together, yeah? Because you'd be bust now, wouldn't you? Because no one's got cash anymore. It's all digital.
it's all this, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's all the phone, the watch, the what have you. And because of that different relationship we have with digital payments, I think that, you know, the payment piece can be brought in a lot earlier on the technology side. You know, I'm going to give you a little scenario here, and it's a bit of an opt-in scenario, so apologies. Let's say you had a case that was related to subscriptions. It's an ongoing wrongdoing. We know that the subscriptions are still being paid. Whether it's an opt-in or opt-out, you can put in that onboarding process or that registration of interest process, an option for them to use open banking to verify who they are, okay? Once they've given that authority for that open banking piece, one, you've done a soft KYC, if you like. It doesn't quite satisfy the SRA regulations, but you know who you are. You've reduced the likelihood of fraud. You've reduced the likelihood of Mickey Mouse signing up to your case, yeah? But then, in part of that, you can then ask for permission to say, can we just check to see if you actually have that subscription, yeah? And maybe only 2 or 3% of your sign-ups will do that. In a opt-out, that's still a significant number, yeah? So now you know that 2% of your registrations of interest, your potential claimants, do actually have that subscription. You know what that subscription looks like on a bank statement, so now you can advise your other 98% what to look for in their bank statement, even if they don't want to share it with you. Then you can even ask for permission to find out how long they've had that subscription for, 6 or 7 years. Suddenly you've got information about the value of claim. And that's all because of the advancements in payment technology. Yeah? So payments is not just for the end of the show. You know, technology is there to help us throughout the whole case, throughout the life side of the case. Yeah? And that's a little one for maybe Valve when you're thinking about that one. Yeah?
Polly, how has Milberg adopted new technology and what more can firms do to continue to optimise for payments?
Yeah, I think for us it was kind of calibrating our CRM into kind of distribution mode and making sure that that was synced as much as it could without an integration with Shieldpay, with the payment agent, and also our client care team and our lawyers in the London office. And the most important thing, like you mentioned, is just understanding where each and every client is in the process, and if they're stuck somewhere, why. And you can communicate that to the client, and you can also resolve it and push it through. So I think the way we configured our CRM from kind of active case mode into active distribution was good. I think we can do better next time. We've learned a lot along the way, and I think the integration piece is something that we need to work on. The other kind of way that we've used technology, I think, is kind of triangulating different communication channels to come at clients in different ways, but at the same time. We've found a lot of success with that. So you'll send them a WhatsApp saying, hey, check your emails. You know, this is Milberg London. And at the same time, or a couple of minutes later, you have an email coming in from Milberg London, which is sitting at the top of their inbox. And then a couple of minutes later, you've got an email from Shieldpay saying, hey, this is how you do it. And we've had a lot of success with that. Although the challenges still remain that you're using kind of separate repositories of data and needing to bring all those together, reconcile them, keep them up to date. I think that's an area that we're working on. And, you know, back to that kind of cost budgeting point, you know, this is months later after, you know, you've been paid out of a judgment or a settlement. You've allocated the client money, so you can't dip back into that for if you've, you know, underestimated your costs for these kind of manual exercises. And obviously, if you've overrun that, then it's eating into the law firm's profit or funders or whatever it is. So the more we can do to improve that reconciliation piece is that's a really important part of the puzzle.
Agreed.
Oh, and sorry, I've just seen this. Don't underestimate old-fashioned modes of communications as well. Actually, we've still needed to telephone people. We've still needed to send letters to people. And I've mentioned checks more than I should have. So, yeah, and that comes back again to your client, understanding your client group, I guess, the age of your clients, whether you've got vulnerable clients. At that,
I guess businesses as well, they were probably check heavy.
Yeah.
Which is a perfect segue into the next question, which is really about, I mean, I hear this all the time, that payments is the easy bit, right? I think when we look at these types of payments, and certainly from the experience of having delivered quite a number of them out over the last couple of years, you'll get the large majority that happen seamlessly, and it's marvelous, and within 3 days you can have 70, 80, in some cases 85% of claimants settled, which is fabulous and exactly what we're trying to achieve. It's then the tail end of that creates the work, that creates the complexity. It's, you know, people have moved internationally, they've passed away, they've had children, they've got married, they've not seen your emails, not seen your communication, have, you know, feared and not trusted the process. It's that is where much of the complexity comes from. But, you know, we can work together to make that a much smaller exceptions process, to coin the industry term. And I'm being naughty now because I'm answering this on your behalf. But Clinton, why do we need to think differently about payments?
Well, all the things you've mentioned, all the victim elders out there who will just ask 1,000 questions even though you're giving them money. You know, that's one of the main issues. But I mean, how many of you remember Superman 3? Superman 3, way back before the Marvelverse, where old Richard Pryor, he was taking 0.5% of everyone's tax bill and, you know, had a nice big lump sum, yeah? No one. I'm not showing my age here, yeah? So when I think of opt-out cases, I always think of that. I always think of, you know, obviously Richard Pryor representing, you know, the defendants, you know, whether it be big tech or big pharma. But then again, Richard Pryor had his own relationship with big pharma that we probably shouldn't go into here. But, you know, it's that scenario where, you know, the little bit that they did wrong here and there may have only affected someone in a small value, you know, very low value. But they did it to so many people, then suddenly there's like a huge sum of money that needs to be distributed, yeah? And that sum of money is problematic for law firms because of SRA regulations, which I'll leave to you. It's also problematic in terms of when the payments have to go out, FCA regulations, which I'll leave to you. But also in terms of the claims administrator, yeah, we have to make sure that how those funds go out on time to the right amount. I know we'll speak about insurance interest later, but, you know, also interest considerations and, you know, the victim elders of this world, yeah. Also, you know, going right back to the start about that whole thing about the demographic of who you're going to pay matters greatly. You know, for low value, high volume, obviously, they may be interested in a Black Hawk solution, yeah, where it's, you know, voucher codes and prepayment cards, you know. They may be interested in a true layer solution where it's open banking, yeah. There may be students who, you know, definitely don't want that money to go into their bank account because it's already overdrawn and that 60 quid will just totally be eaten up and they'll never enjoy it, yeah. So we have to make sure we're considering all these possibilities in getting these high volume, low value payments out. I mean, it's great that, you know, the Shieldpay API, which I've described before, gives you all that visibility on those payments that goes out, gives you all that options on how you can pay them as well. And it's very beneficial in that term. Another aspect of payment issues is something that, I mean, I keep mentioning you guys, but I have talked to you guys a lot about payments. But I had this conversation with our good friend Dan, yeah, and the scenario was that we needed to collect funds from all around the world to pay into an account in Europe, and we had to worry about all the foreign exchange issues, yeah? And obviously, the solution we came up with was an absolutely beautiful, sexy solution. It was so sexy I would marry it. But unfortunately, you know, it hasn't really come off the ground yet, as these things take time. But it's so beautiful. But there is an issue there. There is a problem of payments that's around that whole foreign exchange piece that needs to be resolved, you know, that cannot be ignored. So that's many of the sort of issues related around payments that doesn't even touch on the regulatory issues.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. And Polly, you've been through this. So what makes payments complex to deliver well?
So I think there's three kind of areas. There's the practical, legal, and then there's the regulatory. And it's complicated in all those kind of ways. Practically, we've talked about it, you mentioned it, so clients who are just, for whatever reason, they are just not responding to you. And that comes back to my earlier point about data cleansing. You could just have a typo in their email address, and actually if somebody kind of took a second to look at it, they'd say, oh, that says this, and that's obviously should be Gmail. You correct it, and suddenly you're away. But when you're dealing with thousands and thousands, those things aren't easy to spot unless you're doing that proactive cleanse that I mentioned. Deceased clients, so that doesn't mean that the payment goes somewhere else. It just means that you then need to engage, right, who's the beneficiary of the estate? Is there a will? Is there a power of attorney? Who should I be speaking to? All of that takes a lot of time, hours and hours to resolve just one payment. Changing names, yeah, people getting married, that's a big one. Moving house, clients going abroad, and that comes the expense, so additional banking charges to send funds abroad. And again, that comes back to the budgeting point. Have you allowed in your budget some additional banking charges? You know, 1, 2, a handful doesn't seem like a lot, but depending on the size of your cohort, you know, times by a few thousand, that could mean a significant amount of money. And again, you're working with a fixed number that was agreed months and months ago. And then I think, yeah, practically it's volume and it's all data. So you have to have a really, for me, you just have to have an amazing data team, and we're lucky that we do. And you have to have a team that's engaged from very early on and is working with you and with the payment agent to kind of address those practical difficulties of dealing with such huge volume. On the legal side, you've got things like obviously complying with the terms of any settlement agreement. So any time that you're doing something out of the ordinary, somebody needs to have it in their mind, like, hang on, is this okay? Is this, you know, am I doing anything outside the bounds of when we first thought about this exercise 6 months ago? We've also had to deal with some knotty insolvency issues. So for companies, they might have gone into administration or liquidation or dissolved from the time that they instructed you to the time that you're ready to pay out. And that can be really complicated depending on the particular circumstances. And again, you know, hours and hours of time just resolving one. So interfacing with administrators, then making sure that the funds get directed to the right place. That can be a complicated area. And then on the regulatory side, obviously, you know, the management of client money is heavily regulated, and having always in your mind the SRA account rules, making sure that you're compliant with those all the time. I think coming back to the client steering committee, something that you should be doing from the outset when you're obtaining instructions about how you're going to pay these clients out, in what amounts, according to what rules or criteria, is having, you know, obtaining that express authorization to make withdrawals from the client accounts. If you're sending lumps of money to a payment agent, you need to make sure that you've got the authorization to do that. And then obviously residual client balances is a big headache for law firms generally. But I think particularly in the group action context, because certainly a lot of the consumer claims that are around are more than the £500 threshold, which means you do need to go to the SRA to obtain authority to make withdrawal from the client account and donate the money to charity. But the rules as originally conceived did not have group actions in mind. And so do you make an application on behalf of each client to the SRA? That could be thousands. Can you negotiate with the SRA to do it differently? I don't know the answers to these questions, but it's something that law firms have to grapple with. So yeah, it's complicated. It's really complicated.
Thank you. But can be made much simpler if we all collaborate early and often. I'll say it again. We did have one final point, but there's a couple of things. I'm not going to steal time away from Walter Merrick's, so that's definitely not going to happen. And I'm also conscious
your life
that
is not worth it.
No. I'm also conscious that everybody's probably ready for a glass of something bubbly and fizzy at 4:30. So. I will wrap there. I'm gonna reference Richard Hornshaw from earlier in the day from Akin, in that he said we've got a lot to learn from the US. Absolutely, like the US knows what they're doing in this space when it comes to the scale and breadth and frequency of making payments to claimants. But we also have an awful lot of experience to draw upon already in the UK with the work that we've delivered with GLOs. They have been significant. We're talking tens of thousands. I think maybe into next year and beyond might be hundreds of thousands of people that will be settling too. So there's a huge amount of experience to be had already, and we should be really confident of working together on really slick payments for claimants.
Payments for claimants, wow, nice phrase.
That should have been my thing. So thank you. There are 30 seconds, but does anybody have any questions? And if you do when we run out of time, then we'll be around for a bit if you want to ask any of the Shieldpay team Any questions?
No? Great.
Thank you.